We're going to do a little quick Q&A here, okay? And these are questions from some of the people that have been suffering from Cassandra Syndrome that were in the YouTube comments. Question number 1. My autistic spouse is always telling me, if I want something, just tell me. But after years of marriage, I'm exhausted from having to point out every little thing that needs to be done. I don't want to have to ask for help every single time. Sometimes I just want my spouse to notice that I'm overwhelmed and step in without me having to give instructions. Is that unreasonable? No, but congratulations, you've discovered one of the foundational arguments of the neurodiverse marriage. You know, you're thinking, I shouldn't have to tell you, and your ASD spouse is thinking, why won't you just tell me? And, you know, you bring this up to your therapist and who gives neurotypical advice and they don't know what to say. Anyway, here's what's happening. I'll just speak in generalities here. It's often the case that the neurotypical partner experiences anticipation as kind of part of love. You know, you notice I'm exhausted, you notice the dishes, you notice the laundry, you notice that your spouse is unusually quiet, or you notice the kids are attempting to overthrow the government. You notice that the other people need help. So you're very intuitive about other people's needs. The autistic partner, on the other hand, even though he cares about all those things too, probably, he doesn't automatically notice those things. And that's an important distinction. Ladies, keep that in mind. Not noticing something is not necessarily the same as not caring about it. So yes, direct communication can help, but direct communication doesn't mean one person should become the household air traffic controller. You know, take out the garbage, call the dentist, put the clothes in the dryer, feed the dog, put up the milk, put down your cast iron skillet. So at some point, you're no longer a spouse. If you have to do that all the time, I'll validate that. You're kind of the regional manager. So the goal here is to establish routines, responsibilities, and agreements so fewer things need constant prompting, okay? Direct communication is what we're talking about here. So having to issue work orders to your ASD spouse for the next 40 years probably isn't the dream that you were hoping for, okay? Question number 2, whenever I try to tell my autistic spouse that something hurt me, the conversations go completely sidetracked by tiny details. I'll say something like, I felt completely alone Saturday night, and instead of talking about how I felt, we end up debating exactly what happened, what time it happened, and whether I remembered every detail correctly. Why does this happen? The detail tribunal, okay? You say, I felt completely alone Saturday night, and your ASD partner says, well, technically it was 6:42 p.m., so I wouldn't call that night. Okay, excellent. Thank you, Professor Chronology. So that clarification has completely healed the marriage. I'm being sarcastic here. This often happens because factual accuracy can feel extremely important to your ASD spouse. Meanwhile, the neurotypical partner is trying to communicate emotional meaning. You know, one person is talking about the forest and the other person has discovered an incorrectly identified maple tree. And apparently nobody is leaving until we settle the maple tree situation. So if you recognize this pattern, try saying something like, the exact detail isn't really the point. I'm trying to explain what the experience felt like to me. And if your autistic husband is listening, here's the question that can save approximately 3 arguments per week. This is to the ASD husbands who may be listening. Before correcting the detail, ask yourself, does correcting this fact help my relationship right now? If the answer is no, then let go of it. So if your NT spouse says it was Saturday night and technically it was 6:42, we're going to let go of 6:42, okay? Nobody from the Smithsonian is coming to verify the timeline. So question number 3, my spouse tells me they love me. And honestly, I believe they mean it. But I still spend a lot of time feeling emotionally alone and unloved. They seem confused when I tell them this because from their perspective, their love should be obvious. How can someone genuinely love you and yet leave you feeling like you're not loved? Okay. Arguments are much easier when one person is clearly the villain. You know, someone can genuinely love you while communicating that love in ways your nervous system doesn't recognize very well. So your autistic partner may be thinking, obviously I love you. I mean, I rotated your tires, I repaired the dishwasher, I updated the antivirus software. You know, I've researched retirement accounts for 3 hours. He shows his love by doing things for you. Meanwhile, you're sitting there thinking, could you just give me a hug? Okay, that's the disconnect. Love can be present while the experience of being loved is missing. So instead of spending another 5 years debating whether love exists, let's try asking a different question, which could be, what behaviors help each of us actually experience love? He's going to experience love differently than you, because sometimes the love package was shipped. We just need to figure out why UPS keeps leaving it 3 houses down. Okay, question 4. When we have a serious argument, I can be crying, shaking, or completely overwhelmed, while my autistic husband seems almost strangely calm. Sometimes he barely shows any emotion at all, and that makes me feel like they simply don't care. How can someone look so calm when the relationship feels like it's falling apart? Okay, well that creates enormous misunderstandings. The neurotypical partner's crying, pacing, emotionally overwhelmed. She's thinking it's painfully obvious that I'm in pain. Who could not see me crying over here? So possibly reconsidering every decision they've made since approximately 2008. Meanwhile, the autistic partner is sitting there thinking, whoops, I lost my screen there for a second. You're thinking they just don't care. Let me tell you this, some autistic adults can experience enormous emotional intensity internally while showing very little externally. We call that lack of displayed emotion. Their nervous system may internally be screaming, I need to get out of here, she's being emotional again. Meanwhile, they look so indifferent, they may be shutting down internally and you can't even really see it. They may get extremely logical, they may go quiet, they may need to leave the room. That doesn't mean disappearing emotionally is harmless, I understand that. It means we need to understand what's happening before deciding what it means. So sometimes the calmest looking person in the room is internally running Windows updates at 97%. So he may look fine. While you clearly are not fine, that doesn't mean he's fine. Okay. Number 5 question. My spouse can remember incredibly specific facts about things they're interested in from 20, 30 years ago, but somehow forgets conversations we had yesterday. He can remember model numbers, statistics, dates, and obscure trivia, but forget in an appointment I've reminded him 3 times. How am I supposed not to take that personally? Okay, well that's a fun one. Your ASD husband can't remember you have a dentist appointment Thursday, but he can remember the horsepower of his 1998 Pontiac Firebird. So apparently the brain held a meeting, dentist appointment, delete. Complete specifications of discontinued lawn tractors manufactured between 1984 and 1992. Keep that. That could be important. That's how the autistic brain works, ladies. Sorry. Autistic attention and memory can be highly selective. You've been living it, particularly when information connects with a strong interest. So you add some executive function difficulties in there, some stress, ADHD, and so on. And then everyday information can disappear with impressive efficiency. So before interpreting forgetting as you obviously don't care, let's consider another possibility. They forget, that's it. I realize that explanation isn't nearly dramatic as a Netflix documentary, but sometimes they forget, okay? Question number 6. My spouse frequently tells me that I'm too emotional, too sensitive, or that I'm too big of a deal, make too big of a deal out of things. After hearing that for years, I've actually started wondering whether they're right. How do I know if I'm really overly emotional or if my spouse simply has a much lower tolerance for emotion than I do? Okay, maybe you are highly emotional, but there's another possibility. Maybe your ASD husband has an unusual discomfort with emotion. That's what I find. when I'm working with these guys. So if one person's emotional volume naturally sits around 3 and the other person sits around 7, the person at 3 may be thinking, why are you yelling? How many times have you, as the NT wife, been accused of that? The ASD husband says, why are you yelling? And you're thinking, I'm not yelling. So nervous system, neither nervous system gets to declare itself the official international standard for emotional normality. There's not going to be any election. Nobody appointed your nervous system president. The question isn't who has the current amount of emotion. The question should be, can we express emotion respectfully and learn how to stay connected without overwhelming each other? Number 7, why does every disagreement with my autistic spouse eventually turn into some kind of courtroom debate? I'll be trying to explain that something hurt my feelings, and before I know it, we're arguing about exact words, dates, definitions, who said what first, and whether my interpretation is technically accurate. Why can't we just talk about the hurt? Okay. Well, because sometimes one partner is trying to repair an emotional injury while the other partner is preparing oral arguments before the Supreme Court. He probably feels like he's being interrogated. You know, you say, that hurt my feelings. And suddenly we have timestamps, screenshots, exhibits A through G, historical precedent, definitions from Merriam-Webster, a weather report from the evening in question, and apparently 3 expert witnesses are standing by. Then comes the closing argument. Therefore, technically, I did nothing wrong. Wonderful. Unfortunately, you're still married to somebody whose feelings are hurt, and I would want him to understand the difference between impact and intent. Relationships usually aren't repaired by proving who had the more technically accurate interpretation. Sometimes the most useful response isn't, here's why you're wrong. It's, I can understand why that hurt. So those words right there can save a lot of grief. Question number 8. My autistic partner says they need to be alone when they get overwhelmed. And I understand that. But sometimes they disappear from the conversation and never come back to finish it. How can I tell the difference between someone legitimately regulating their nervous system and someone using alone time to avoid dealing with relationship problems? That's a great question. So look at what happens afterward. Healthy regulation sounds like I'm overloaded, I need 30 minutes, then I'll come back and we'll finish talking. Avoidance, on the other hand, sounds like silence. Silence on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, silence on Thanksgiving, Christmas, the Super Bowl. So if they leave and come back, that's probably regulation. If they leave and that topic never ever comes up again, or they're gone for 3 or 4 hours or 3 or 4 days. I've heard that from NTYs. Disappeared for 3 or 4 days. I've had one lady said he was gone for 2 weeks in a shutdown. So that's definitely avoidance right there. Question number 9. How can my spouse act completely normal 5 minutes after we've had a huge argument? I'm still upset, trying to process what happened and wondering how we're going to repair things. And suddenly they are talking about dinner, the weather, or something they saw online as if nothing happened. Does the argument really mean that little to them? Okay, well, you just had an emotional equivalent of the Battle of Gettysburg, okay? You're sitting on the couch trying to determine whether your marriage still exists. Your ASD spouse walks into the room 5 minutes later and says, you know, do you want tacos? Do you want sour cream on your tacos? So you're sitting there thinking, okay, we just had a terrible fight. My heart's broken, and now you're asking me whether I want sour cream on the taco or not. So he has had a discharge of negative pent-up energy pretty fast. Pressure cooker, it explodes. A pressure cooker doesn't take 5 minutes to explode. It happens in a couple seconds. So he explodes, meltdown. He discharges all that cortisol and adrenaline. He's fine. In the meantime, you're traumatized for 3 or 4 days. This is the last question for today. Number 10. She says, I've tried over and over to explain to my spouse how lonely I feel in this marriage. But it seems like he doesn't understand what I mean or immediately becomes defensive and starts explaining why I shouldn't feel lonely. How can I communicate loneliness in a way that might actually get through without starting another argument? Okay, well, you may need to stop trying to prove your loneliness for one thing and just start describing it. For example, instead of, well, you're never there for me, or you don't see me, or I feel invisible, that's too vague for him. Try something along the lines of, there are evenings when we're sitting 10 feet apart and I feel like I'm living alone. So specific experiences are often easier for the ASD brain to understand than global accusations like you don't care or you're distant and so on. You know what that means. Your NT girlfriends would know what that means. Not so much him. So resist the instinct to immediately produce evidence proving that that they somehow just don't care. It's not that he sees your loneliness and just doesn't care. He doesn't see it. We're talking about emotions blindness now. Okay, that was a quickie Q&A. If you have any questions you would like for me to answer on the next Q&A, just put them below this video here. Okay, thanks for listening.